Okay, guys, so we're going to talk about how do we use the calculator to write a linear equation. This is something that we call, I'm going to write over here, this is something we call regression. This is when the calculator, we give it a table of values, and it is able to take those table of values, and it uses this really fancy formula that's way above our Algebra 1 heads. And it calculates what we call the least squares regression formula. It uses that to calculate the formula of an equation of a line for you. So this is really neat because if you watched the video on how to find slope 4 ways, then you know that we use that formula. We could take a table of values, 2 points. We took points on a graph. We'd have to do rise over run. Or we could use the formula and we could subtract the y values in the numerator and the x values in the denominator. And it's this long process of subtracting those values and using that formula to find slope. And then it's an even more complicated way to find the y-intercept to write the equation. Well, we're going to use the calculator and it's going to do all of that work for you. So you have the steps listed out over here. Now, the calculator I'm using looks a little bit different because I forgot to bring one home from school, but I'm going to use this one. The key strokes are exactly the same. The buttons are in the same location. It just looks a little bit different. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to select Stat. So you have a Stat button. It's right here. It's next to your arrow keypad. So you select Stat, and you're going to see this menu comes up. You can see the menus look the same. So you're going to want to hit Enter and tell it to edit. Now you see I already have some values in my table. So if I want to clear my table out, if I arrow up and highlight the name List 1, if I hit Clear and then go down, you see it clears out the whole thing. So again, you hit Clear and then arrow down, and it'll clear out the entire list. So what you're going to do, as you'll see, Step 2 says enter the X values in List 1 and enter the Y values in List 2. So here we want to put in List 1 the X values, and in List 2 you want to put the Y values. So in List 1 right here, I'm going to enter all of these X values: -5, 5, 10, and 15. It's important to list all the values in a table because the more values you list, the more accurate your equation is going to be. So now in List 2, I'm going to list out all of these Y values. So -11, enter. -8, enter. -2, enter. 1, and 4. Okay, so now I have my X values in List 1, and I have my Y values in List 2. So then it says the next thing to do is Step 3, select Stat again. So we're going to go back to that Stat button. We're going to hit it again. But instead of hitting Enter for Edit, we're going to arrow over to Calculate. Now you notice it gives you all these options, okay? The one we're going to be using is Option 4. And you can see it says right arrow over to Calc and select Option 4. Option 4, if you notice, is Line Reg, Lin Reg. That stands for Line Linear Regression, REG for regression. And you can see the form it's going to give you. That's very close to y equals mx plus b. But instead of m, the calculator uses a. So the a will be the slope, and the b value will still be the y-intercept. So you can arrow down to 4 and hit Enter, or you could just hit the number 4. Either way it will work. So I'm going to hit Enter. Now what it's asking you here is it's saying, did you put the x values in List 1? And did you put the y values in List 2? And yes, we did. That's what we want. That's what we did. So we can keep going down to Calculate. When it's flashing on Calculate, you hit Enter. And there it is right there. There's your formula. So the calculator is telling us that our A value is 0.6 and our B value is -5. Now, normally we don't use decimals when we're talking about slope. We like to use fractions so that we know how much to rise and how much to run. So if it gives you a decimal, sometimes you can easily convert this to a fraction. So in order to do that, I'm going to hit Second Mode. And what that's going to do is take me to a screen where I can just begin to calculate. I'm off of my statistics screen where it's giving me that equation. And so now I can take my decimal, 0.6, and then if I hit the math button, I'm going to select option number 1 because I want it to tell me to take that decimal and convert that to a fraction. So it's telling you to take a number and convert it to a fraction. So if I hit enter, so it's saying you want me to take 0.6 and change that to a fraction. I hit enter again for yes, and you notice the fraction is 3/5. So this is equal to 3/5. And if you notice, I'm going to go back now to stat, over to calculate, option 4. I'm going back to that screen because my values are still in list 1 and list 2. So I can tell it to calculate that equation for me again, and it did. So you notice at the top, it tells you the form of the equation it's giving you. It says y is equal to ax plus b. That's the form it's giving it to you in. So now if we're going to write the equation, we can plug in for a. We said that's 3/5. X is part of the equation. That's a variable x. Plus b. Our b value is -5. So I could write plus -5, or I could just write -5. So we just wrote an equation with the calculator. Basically, the calculator wrote it for us. It told us what values to plug in. So you notice a is where usually m is. That's your slope. So our slope of this table of values that is representing a linear function is 3/5, and our y-intercept, the b value, is -5. Okay? So now let's go over to, what if we given 2 points? Well, we can do the same thing. Again, we're going to follow the same exact steps. We're going to hit stat, and we're going to hit enter for edit. Now we're back to our list. So again, I want to clear out these lists. So I highlight the list name, hit clear, and then down arrow. So I'm going over to list 1. I'm going to hit clear, and then down arrow, and it clears out the whole list for me. So I can still use the calculator if I'm given 2 points instead of using the slope formula. I remember that ordered pairs are given to me as x comma y, and I want to put in list 1 always, I want to put my x values in list 1 and my y values in list 2. So for this example here, I would put -3 in list 1 and 15 because those are the x values. My y values, I would put 4 and -8. Okay, now I have my values in my list. So then I go back to the stat button, but this time I arrow over to calculate. And again, we're going to choose option number 4 because that means line reg, linear regression. So I hit enter. And again, it's asking me, did you put your x's in L1 and your y values in list 2? And we did. So then I go down to calculate and hit enter. Now for this one, it's telling me that my a value is -point and then a bunch of repeating 6s. So I'm going to write it down. And I'm not gonna write down all of those 6s, but I'm going to remember that it's a lot of them. And then my b value, it says, is 2. Now I want to convert this decimal to a fraction. Now hopefully you can remember that negative or point repeating 6s is the fraction -2/3. But maybe you can't remember that. That was one of those benchmark fractions that you were supposed to learn in 6th grade. So if you can't remember that, that's okay. The calculator will still convert it for you. Go to second, remember mode for quit. It's going to bring us to a calculation screen. So I'm going to put the negative and then 0 point. And because I know these 6s are repeating, I'm just going to fill up my screen with 6s. And this is important. If you fill up your screen with as many 6s as you can, then go to math and then tell it to convert that to a fraction. You notice it will give you the fraction -2/3. Okay, so then I know that the calculator gives it to me is y equals ax plus b. It gave me the a value and it gave me the b value. So now I just need to plug them in. For a, we had -2/3. X is part of the formula, the equation, plus my b value, which is 2. Okay, so maybe I'm given a graph with 2 points. But notice these points are labeled for us. So it's the same as if we had 2 points over here. We have a graph with 2 points that are labeled. So I'm going to go to Stat. I'm going to go to Edit. Again, I'm going to clear out my list. Okay, so I'm going to put my X values in list 1. So my X value in this ordered pair is -5. The X value for this ordered pair is -1. I'm going to put my Y values in. I have 2 and 0. Okay, remember, now I go back to Stat. Once I have my X and Y values in list 1 and list 2, I hit Stat again. This time I go over to Calculate. And I'm going to choose option number 4. This time I'm just going to hit the 4. It brings me to the screen. I go down to Calculate, and I hit Enter. So it's telling me that my A value is -0.5, and my B value is -0.5. Now, hopefully you remember that 0.5 is the fraction 1/2, and it's negative. And my B value is the same. So I'm going to write my equation. My A value, -1/2. That's my slope, X, minus 1/2. So there's my equation right there. Okay, so what if I'm given a graph and I don't have any points labeled at all? Well, we could rise and run, but there's a lot of things to remember. You have to remember if you rise up and then run left, it's a negative slope. Or you have to find the coordinates of the points, and then you have to subtract them correctly. So there's a lot of things to remember. So maybe it's easier just to put those points in the calculator and let the calculator tell you the slope. But we don't have any points listed, but I can still find like 2 really good points. I see one here and one here. Now the key is make sure these are really clear points that you can tell the coordinates of. So for this point right here, I know this is the origin. So the coordinates of this point, I go over 1 in the X direction, and then I go up 2. And this point down here, I know I go over 2 in the positive X direction, and I don't go up or down any in the Y direction, so that's 2, 0. So there's my 2 points. So I'm going to go back to my calculator. I'm going to hit the Stat button. I'm going to hit Enter and Edit, and I'm going to clear out my list again. And if you don't want to clear out your list, that's okay. Look, I can put my X values in here, 1 and 2, and then I can just retype over these values here. These values happen to be the same as these points here. So my X values are 1 and 2, and my Y value is 2 and 0. Now notice when you're looking at them in the table, it should be in the same form as the ordered pair, 1, 2, 1, 2. It should match. It's important that you pair them up correctly. Go back to Stat, Calculate, option 4, Linear Regression, Calculate again. It tells me my A value is -2. That's my slope, because that's the value that's sitting in front of X. And slope is the coefficient in front of X. So my equation is Y equals -2X plus 4. Now, they may not always ask you to find the equation. They may just want you to find the slope, and that's okay. You could still use the calculator even if you just wanted to find the slope, or maybe you just want to know the y-intercept. The calculator gives you all of that information. It's a pretty handy thing.